we're happy to have Brian Shinkyu Coté back again. He's studying with Shuji Mitzvah, and today he's going to give us a talk about Guoshi's three calls, Guisho's three calls. You can define?
All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. Just want to double check before we start. So yeah, this talk's called "The World is Nothing But Teachers," and yeah, it will talk about Guoshi's three calls. So as you said, I'm Shinkyu. I'm a student of Shuji's, and this talk originally began as a way to introduce people who aren't familiar with Soto Zen to Soto Zen. And as any of you who've practiced Zen for a while or who've never practiced Zen before today, as you can tell, it can be pretty difficult to talk about what it is we do in Zen. We can describe meditation techniques. We can list off all the activities we've done during a retreat, but the real heart of the matter, what it is that Zen is much more difficult to articulate, but that's what we're here to do today. So I thought to myself, how would Zen Master Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen, do this? And the answer for him most often is to talk about a koan. So let's talk about a koan. But first, what is a koan? I know some of you are probably pretty familiar with koans, but for those of you who haven't encountered them yet, you probably have heard of them before, even if you're not aware of it. What's the sound of one hand clapping? That's probably the most famous one. But there's also, does even a dog have the Buddha nature? Which, no, they don't, but sometimes, yes, they do. These koans are typically stories of Zen students and Zen teachers acting very oddly together, almost paradoxically. But I'd like to show you that in at least one case, there isn't a paradox there, but instead, a call to live life to its fullest. And the koan we're going to talk about is Guoshi's three calls. You'll sometimes also see it as the National Teacher's three calls. It's case 17 from the Gateless Barrier, or the Mumonkan, which is a collection of koans that was put together in 1228 CE. And I feel that in particular, this koan really captures the essence of what it is we're trying to do in Soto Zen. So first, the koan as written, it's a bit of an abbreviation of the fuller account, although even the fuller account is still a bit abbreviated. So I've added in a couple extra elements to flesh it out a little bit. So I'll read it and then we'll go over it more carefully. So it goes. One day, Guoshi called to his attendant, Dan Yuan. In response to the call, the attendant came running and answered, "Yes, master." Never mind. And Dan Yuan went back to what he'd been doing. A little while later, the master called again, Dan Yuan. And Dan Yuan came running and said, "Yes, master." The master said, never mind. And Dan Yuan went back to his quarters. And then the master called him a third time, Dan Yuan, and the attendant came running and answered, "Yes, master." And then the master remarked, "I was about to say that I was ungrateful to you, but the fact is that you are ungrateful to me." That's it. Pretty straightforward. When I first read this koan, I thought to myself, what the heck is even happening here? I couldn't make heads or tails of it. One tricky thing with koans is that they're very removed from us historically and culturally, and really, they're not meant to stand on their own. Once you've read through a koan, you have to go out and discover the backstory, find out who the protagonists are, what their relationships were, just a lot of background before what the koan is trying to do will become clear to you. So to fill in some of that background, this koan takes place in China around the mid-700s CE. Guoshi was a student of one of the most famous and important Zen masters of all time, the 6th Chinese patriarch Huineng, the same Huineng of the Platform Sutra, which is one of Zen's foundational texts. Besides Zen's original founder, Bodhidharma, who came from the West to save all sentient beings, Huineng is considered Zen's second founder, the person who first equated meditation with wisdom or prajna. Before Huineng, Zen was still a gradualist school, a school that saw the attainment of nirvana as a step-by-step process. After Huineng, Zen was seen as a sudden school, where nirvana was attainable in the blink of an eye, or at the crack of a kyosaku, or the smack of a Zen master. The person who Guoshi is talking to is Dan Yuan. Dan Yuan is Guoshi's attendant. Now, being an attendant was a very important position for a young monk. It meant that you were at the Zen master's side throughout the day. You're also at his beck and call, as we see from the koan. But this also meant that you got to see the day-to-day practice of Zen as expressed through the master's life as he lived it moment to moment. And that's not an opportunity to waste. And as we'll see, Dan Yuan didn't waste his chance. But back to the koan. The key I found, so to speak, to unlocking a koan is not to try to figure it out. They're designed to break your brain because they're pointing to a mode of being, an activity of life that isn't dependent on words or concepts. These old Chinese practitioners were really dedicated to not conceptualizing. They were trying to point to all of this, to just get back to right here and right now. So, after having just said that these practitioners were trying to point to something beyond words and concepts, let me give you a word that sums up what Dan Yuan was doing. There's a famous book from 1970 called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. It's a compilation of Dharma talks given by Shunryu Suzuki, who was a Japanese Soto Zen teacher and monk who founded the San Francisco Zen Center and just generally helped spread Zen in the West. One of the ideas that he really stressed was what's called beginner's mind. So what does this mean, beginner's mind? It's a way to talk about that state of mind where you don't have enough information about a topic to really have opinions about it at all, where there's really nothing but wonder and curiosity available. Like before you learned to drive, when you were just sitting in driver's ed class, imagining what it would be like to be behind the wheel. Or before you met your partner's family, like, who are these people that made this person that I love? Who could they possibly be? Shunryu is pointing towards a more open, honest way of interacting with the world, a type of interaction without preconceived notions. It's the type of mind where instead of saying, oh yeah, I know exactly what type of person you are, you say, I have no idea what type of person you are, but I want to know. Now, you might stop me and be like, am I really supposed to just let someone treat me like Guoshi treated Dan Yuan? It can certainly look like Guoshi is bullying Dan Yuan, but it's good to remember that these types of relationships, student-teacher relationships, student-student relationships, what have you, should be built on mutual trust and respect. And as crazy as some of these koan stories can get with their slaps and their kicks and any number of questionable occurrences, the truest realization of Buddhist training occurs when all parties involved have earned and displayed trust. We take vows to be of benefit to all beings, and that should be remembered, especially in situations like this koan. So all that being said, let's go back to the koan again and take another closer look. There's Guoshi, the master, who calls his attendant Dan Yuan 3 times. Each of these times, Dan Yuan replies pleasantly, seemingly undisturbed by Guoshi's odd behavior. Similar to most koans, there's a give and take and interplay between the participants. here specifically, to understand what's happening, we need to take a look at what Danyuan's doing, which, as we've already said, is beginner's mind. But not just any beginner's mind, but radical, dedicated beginner's mind. He stripped his mind of any preconceived notions and is just meeting Guoshi's requests at absolutely face value. If it had been me by the third time he'd called, I'd been like, why are you even messing with me? Because I'd be bringing all my baggage with me, thinking he must have some type of ulterior motive, or is he testing me? Is he just being a bully? Is he crazy? Am I crazy? Do I want to keep hanging out with someone that would treat me this way? The types of questions and reactions that you'll have will be born from your own particular life experiences. If you had a rough relationship with your mother or father, say, then the same types of thoughts and emotions that would appear during those confrontations tend to appear in other types of situations, like the ones where you're facing your own personal Guoshi. Instead of facing Guoshi as Guoshi, you'll find yourself facing the memory of a scolding or a distant parent. Or if you have a boss who's particularly nasty, you might find your boss's face covering up Guoshi's like a mask. And then all the related emotions and ideas and behaviors will just spring right up out of that. Beginner's mind, however, is simply seeing Guoshi as Guoshi, seeing your mother and father as your mother and father, your boss as your boss, yourself as yourself. We often find ourselves spending our days arguing with ghosts of people who aren't even there, who we carry around inside of ourselves and fight against or long for or just lament. When Danyuan says, "Yes, master," he's left all of his preconceptions behind, and he's just looking at each of Guoshi's requests simply as requests. He's not thinking about the other requests that came before or the possible requests that are coming down the line. He's just facing what's right in front of him as what's right in front of him. That's it. So, that being said, let's take a look at Guoshi's final lines again. They read, and then the master remarks, "I was about to say that I was ungrateful to you, but the fact is that you are ungrateful to me." There are a couple of translations of these lines that I found. Another interesting one is, "I thought that I had transgressed against you, but you too had transgressed against me." So why would Guoshi think that he was being ungrateful to Danyuan, or that he transgressed against him? I think this is acknowledging a natural response to beginner's mind, where sometimes we do need our preconceived notions to help keep us safe or to keep us and our relationships healthy. We don't want to blot them out entirely from our minds, but we want to understand what it is they are and why they are like they are. Guoshi is telling Danyuan that all those times he'd called him, Guoshi himself hadn't been practicing beginner's mind. And so the reciprocity of their relationship in that moment had been broken. The same is true of Danyuan, but from the opposite perspective. Guoshi called Danyuan 3 times in order to test him. He is ungrateful, and he has transgressed against Guoshi in the sense that Danyuan's proven that he doesn't need a teacher anymore because he's perfectly embodied the teachings. So in the true Zen fashion, to have been transgressed against is a positive statement here. It's good to remember that the Zen teachings aren't grand statements about the fundamental nature of reality, although you'll probably hear people talk about them that way. And Buddhists have been arguing about it for thousands of years. But the teachings are just a raft that we use to cross the river. Once we've crossed over, it's time to put the raft down. It may feel like we're being ungrateful to the raft, just leaving it there after it's been so essential for us, but I mean, sorry, raft, I'm not going to keep dragging them around with me now that I'm up on dry land. That's just ridiculous. So all this talk about beginner's mind is good, but how exactly are we supposed to cultivate it? How do we make it happen in our own lives? That's a good question because it ties right into the original question we had at the beginning of the talk, namely, how can we talk about Zen and Soto Zen in particular? As Zen practitioners, we're the Buddhists who meditate. Now, almost all Buddhists meditate, but Zen people and Soto Zen people in particular really meditate a lot. We can get carried away with it a bit. However, the method is very, very simple. We call it zazen, which just means sitting meditation. And more specifically, it's called shikantaza, which simply means just sitting. And that's the method. We find a comfortable seat, or we lie down if we're unable to sit comfortably, and face a blank wall and sit. That's it. This is how Soto practitioners develop beginner's minds. They face the wall and simply sit, just like how Don Yuan answered those 3 calls with no preconceptions. Just us here in this very moment, right here, right now, as it is. This moment as this moment. But what is that? Being right here, right now. Every Dharma teacher is trying to express the Buddha Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, but we each have our own particular set of ideas or phrases that point to the heart of how it is that we conceive of and express the Dharma through our own particular body minds. For me, it's just always saying, be right here, right now. That's beginner's mind for me. That's the entirety of the Dharma. It all begins here, lives here, and rests here. Simple. But not too long ago, a Dharma brother of mine made a good point that got me thinking pretty hard about what it is that I've been saying all this time. He said basically, even a dog lives in the here and now, and they seem to be bound to their baser instincts. It's nothing to blame them about, but it's just their dog nature. And it kind of hit me straight in the brain and knocked some of those old conceptions loose and left me looking at a scattered box of puzzle pieces. I wasn't sure if they all quite fit back together properly. And it's criticism that I've heard before from more than a few people, especially dedicated practitioners from other Buddhist paths. The Zen way often looks really strange to them, almost like it's missing important pieces. The question always seems to come down to, if we really are dedicated to living in this very moment without any preconceptions, wouldn't that mean that we'll be pushed and pulled by any old impulse? And that's almost like a koan in reverse, where instead of dropping conceptual mind to directly manifest this moment, we're called on to reverse engineer a theory of our own practice. So, and if we can't even answer a simple question like that, what's this practice we're doing? How sure can we be about what we're doing? Or how can we really be sure? And the thing is that my Dharma brother is right. We do run the risk of being caught by our baser urges. And it doesn't have to be anything as dramatic as the old standard sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Just pick any of the 3 poisons and ask yourself, what are the chances that we're not being delusional about something right now, or that we're angry, or that we're greedy about something, about anything? How could we ever hope to free ourselves from a situation like that? How could we ever establish a skillful practice with these types of stumbling blocks in our way? And as dire as that situation sounds, there is a simple trick. And by simple, I mean, it can be summed up in a seemingly simple statement, but how it unfolds through the circumstances of our lives, that mileage may vary. And the trick? We bring the 3 poisons into our practice. As Shuji likes to say, everything has positive, negative, and neutral characteristics. These 3 characteristics turn into the 3 poisons when we grasp onto the positive, push away the negative, and ignore the neutral. And how specifically do we bring these 3 poisons into the practice? By simply looking. We watch when we push things away, that call to the doctor, that difficult conversation with a colleague. We see ourselves grasp after things, just one more episode before bed, one more bite of ice cream before I'm done for good, promise. And we see ourselves in delusion. That's the tricky one, at least for me, since in order to overcome that, we have to honestly see where we've fallen short, catch ourselves making the types of excuses that I just mentioned. And that takes practice and patience and diligence, and sometimes a willingness to listen to ourselves, to others. That requires building up the dharma eye, the eye that can see us as we are, moment by moment, right here, right now, while we're exercising beginner's minds, when the lancet of zazen is piercing right to the core of this very moment. And all this comes to a head with the idea that the Buddha Dharma rises right up out of zazen. How exactly does the Buddha Dharma rise up from zazen? It takes a fierce and dedicated looking at this very moment right here, like we just talked about. And what is it that we're looking at? It's the very fabric of our lives. There's another old koan that gets to the same point. It concerns Zhuan Sha, a Zen master who lived in the late 9th century China. The koan takes place at a monastery where the sound of a nearby river is audible from the main hall. And it goes, a monk said, as a student entering this monastery, I ask you to point me on the way. Zhuan Sha, the master, replied, do you hear that water flowing over the dam? The monk said, yes, sir. Zhuan Sha replied, enter there. Or as I've seen translated elsewhere, that is your gate. So the monk is just supposed to listen to the sound of water flowing over the dam. What does that have to do with anything we've been talking about? How does that have anything to do with the way, or with the rising up the Buddha Dharma from zazen, or with being right here, right now? Allow me to dive a little bit further in the deep end, and then we'll resurface, and hopefully it'll all make sense. The thread that binds all of these teachings together is the teaching of the samskaras, or the mental formations. It's the 5th of the 5 skandhas, or the 5 aggregates. These 5 make up the early Buddhist conception of mind, of how we experience being human. So quite heady stuff. And it's good. It's also good to mention that you'll probably recognize these from the Heart Sutra, which touches on all these topics as well. So the 5 skandhas in summary are: 1, consciousness. This is both the vital force that keeps us alive, and it's the force that drives our 6 sense consciousnesses, of which there are 5. Eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. 2, form, which is to the eye what sound is to the ear. It's our perception of all the stuff out there. It leads us to believe that we're fundamentally separate from everything around us. 3, sensation. This is our automatic reflexive categorizing of all stimuli coming in from the 6 sense consciousnesses listed above as either positive, negative, or neutral. 4, perception. And it's not like our English word perception, which means to be aware of something. Here it's more technical. It has 2 differing but complementary aspects. 1, when you encounter something that you've never seen before, our perception makes a list of unique characteristics of that object so that we can identify it again the next time we encounter it. And 2, which follows right from 1, it means using that list of characteristics to recognize that object again. So almost like memory. And finally, 5, the samskaras, or mental formations, or just formations. These mental formations are the list of characteristics that we just talked about in perception. But more than that, but more than just being a list of characteristics to identify objects or ideas or feelings, they're They're also habitual behavior patterns. Anything that might provide us with a prefabricated set of guidelines from the past with which to perceive and deal with the world. So basically, they're karma. Now, you might stop me here and say, why are mental lists of characteristics and habitual behavior patterns grouped together here? What's the connection? We typically conceive of objects, ideas, and thoughts as existing independently from ourselves. They exist out there on their own. However, the Buddha pointed out 2,500 years ago that when we perceive something, when we make a mental list of characteristics in order to recognize it again, each object also has a purpose that we give it, and that purpose is a means to an end. And that end, to alleviate our suffering. I buy a fancy pair of shoes, people are gonna like them, I'm gonna feel better about myself, I'm gonna get this new job, I'm gonna make more money, life will be easier, life will be better. The shoes and the job never strictly exist simply as shoes or a job detached from the rest of reality. And that's not to say that sometimes these things do make us feel better. Maybe that new job comes with better insurance, so there's less worry about health issues. Totally legit. But what we're pointing at is that we also impute an emotional aspect into this job by definition. Although you won't find that definition in a dictionary, you will find it within yourself. And knowing this is a solid step towards acting skillfully towards ourselves, our employment, our coworkers, our family, everything. And it should also be noted that these mental formations aren't strictly our own. The way that we categorize the world, the way that we emotionally react to everything around us around us and within us. These are also an inheritance from our parents, grandparents, neighbors, ancestors, going all the way back to the beginningless beginning. For example, we don't necessarily choose which jobs are prestigious or which shoes are fancy. Even more than that, we had nothing to do with the simple idea of things being prestigious or fancy. That's a group decision that was made by everyone going all the way back. As well, when someone says something to me that I don't like, it isn't just me getting angry, it's all of my ancestors, human, animal, bacterial, you name it, all getting angry, all going back to the beginning. And how is that? Allow me to use the 5 skandhas to illustrate this. My consciousness awakens when these words hit my eardrums. I observe the form of the person speaking them. Sensation, borrowing a template from the mental formations from karma, judges these words as negative. Perception, also borrowing a template from the mental formations from karma, recognizes that these words are hurtful. And the mental formations, relying on both my own particular experiences with similar situations, but also relying on the experience of similar situations going all the way back to the infinite past, provides a whole list of suggestions on how to deal with this particular person. Give them a good punch, maybe. Ignore them, perhaps. It really depends on our own past. I mean, if I were a dog, I probably wouldn't punch them because there's not a lot of examples of dogs punching people in the past. So fair enough. So a quick aside. During the days that I was working on this Dharma talk, I had an encounter at work with a coworker. I work with robots and machines. I'm kind of like an old school engineer, like the type of person that keeps the trains running. I was in an unfamiliar area and was trying to fix one of the machines there. But what I was doing was not working. And very apropos of what we were just talking about, I was using a strategy that works very well in my own area on a machine. I was using that strategy on a machine from a different area, and the strategy was not working. That's when a colleague of mine, who was in early from another shift, came by and fixed the issue immediately with no problem. And then they very graciously explained their method, why what I did didn't work, and how to fix it correctly next time. And all the while I listened, my mind, there was an entire cascade of excuses and angry recriminations, shameful confessions, and just a lot of unskillful nonsense just splashing around in there. These are the samskaras, mental formations, karma, old solutions to new problems. However, thanks to my Zen practice, I simply watched my mind just ooze out all this nonsense, thanked my coworker, and went about my day. But the things I could have said, the things I might have said in the past to this poor person who was just trying to help, that's the power of practice. And in real time, we can watch ourselves, not react, gauge a proper response, and then get that response and just be on our way. So the detour is finally over. We'll return to the question we posed just a little while ago, namely, what does the sound of the water flowing over the dam have to do with anything that we've been talking about? And the answer, listening to the sound of the water is an upaya. It's a skillful means, which breaks the cycle of consciousness, form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and back again, the 5 skandhas. Instead, we just focus in on the pure sound of not even water, but just the pure experience of sound. Dogen talks about this very process in the Fukan Zazengi, the universal recommendations for seated meditation, where he writes, put aside the intellectual practice of investigating words and chasing phrases, and learn to take the backward step that turns the light and shines it inward. Body and mind of themselves will drop away and your original face will manifest. If you want to realize such, get to work on such right now. Here, these words and phrases, samskaras, mental formations, drop away during zazen, leaving only the pure original face, which is who we are as seen from beyond the 5 skandhas. And so this brings us back to beginner's mind again. Beginner's mind is that mind that sees the world before the 4th skandha, perception, is able to create a list of characteristics that it can use to categorize the world, where there's only the flow of consciousness, free of a self, with nothing essentially abiding to separate it from the rest of the universe. We are, as they say, empty, boundless. And that is to be right here, right now. The 1st skandha, the sense consciousnesses, flow of themselves. We see form, but we know that it's neither inner nor outer. We watch sensation now quieted, reacting. We watch sensation react to experience, but we only use it as a guide. We don't cling, push away, don't ignore. When our perception registers the world of objects around us, we recognize that there are no 2 objects, ideas, processes, what have you, that are ever the same, even when we're using the same word for them, especially when we're using the same word for them. And finally, when the karma of our mental formations rises up, suggesting courses of action, trying to categorize the world, struggling to use old habits to solve new problems, we can simply look at it as karma, as an inheritance that we can either pick up or leave there lying on the ground. And all of this taken together is how the Buddha Dharma arises from just looking, from just being right here, just sitting silently in zazen, because what looks so silent and so still from the outside, and often I'll admit from the inside as well, is an energetic living in this very moment, in Nikon, as Dogen calls it. In the simple act of observation, we notice the processes of our life and our interactions with this process, or as this process, reveal the Buddha Dharma. We see the skandhas arising. We feel the overwhelming impulse towards compassion, the need to save all beings, to free ourselves from suffering and dissatisfaction. The suffering and dissatisfaction, that's gripped us, that still grips us. This is Buddha Dharma. This is our lives. It's right here, right now in front of us. It's inside of us. It is us. It is what we are. In this very moment, in Nikon, we experience ourselves as the ever-flowing continuum of the skandhas, consciousness, form, sensation, perception, and mental formations. And like Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, who recognized while deeply practicing the Prajnaparamita that all 5 skandhas are empty, and through that realization, relieving all suffering, all dissatisfaction. When we too realize that the skandhas are truly empty, that they have no inherent being, that they're always changing and always able to be changed at a moment's notice, when we're right here, right now, living in this moment, listening to the water flowing over the dam, when we're like Dan Yuan, facing those 3 calls with no preconceptions, beginner's mind fully actualized, we are truly free. So when the Guoshis of the world call out to us, and we can find our Guoshis everywhere, that person who just cut us off in traffic, that guy who just said something rude to us in line, or the voices of relatives long gone that still haunt us, when our teachers call out to us over and over again, are going to see the uniqueness, the unrepeatability, the suchness of those calls, of those situations of our lives. Through the power of beginner's mind, I know that we will. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Brian?
I don't know. Go ahead.
I can hear you.
I was just gonna say that I like the idea of beginner's mind being, I don't know, kind of, I don't know if it would be, I guess, decontextualizing or contextual, like our thoughts and all of the challenging feelings and ideas when they pop up, that, you know, when we're just looking at them, like, we don't have to own them, and we realize more deeply anyway that they aren't actually us. Like, if I get pissed off like out of the blue, and it's not something that feels good, it's not something that I like, but it's also not exactly me either, is it? And so when you do that, it takes the shame out of it, and then you're able to work with it more. And by work with it, I mean just kind of watch it and like see what it does. And so in that way, it's like, it's really helpful.
That's pretty much like, for me, it's almost the whole of the practice. Like I was saying, it all comes out of observation. There was and kind of what you're saying, like watching the anger arise. I'm in the process of reading another fascicle from the Shobo Genzo, the Daigo, the Great Enlightenment, where Dogen's talking about awakening and enlightenment, also not being separate from delusion, which is exactly what you're talking about, where our awakening is watching our delusion and then owning it, not owning it, just seeing it happen in real time. So instead of like trying to go to this rarefied realm where we're just these purely glowing beings with no issues and no problems whatsoever, what it looks like from the actual worm's eye view is just, we're dealing with all our nonsense, really. It's moment to moment. Sometimes we feel good, sometimes we feel bad, sometimes we're angry, sometimes we're happy. Just got to look at it. Don't grasp it, don't push it away. It really makes a huge difference. Being someone that used to be like, I mean, maybe every now and then still, but I used to be a very angry person. Just about anything you name. Can't find my pencil. Ooh, I'm gonna be real mad about that. Or something major, crashed the car. Ooh, I'm mad about that too. Just these old cycles of karma that we get into. Usually passed down through the generations, just trying to solve a current issue with an old strategy that worked, where like you're a little kid, throw a fit, get your way. Now you're 30 years old, throw a fit, still get your way. That's not good. But it's something that your brain can definitely tell you that, yeah, that's a great course. That's going to be a great course of action. But are you really living for the benefit of all beings when you're doing that? No. I don't even know if you're living for the benefit of yourself when you're doing that.
I really enjoyed the Dharma talk today, and I think it made me thinking, and it is a season, it's football season, and I've always heard that the best receivers are those that have a short memory. They drop that pass, and then the next play, they forget about it. They focus on the moment and that play that's happening there. And it just, I made a connection there when thinking about how having that beginner's mind can really be, so helpful as you go forward.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm not the biggest sports person, but I every time I'm sitting, I watch a lot of samurai movies with my son. So every now and then I'll just be like sitting in zazen, like before giving this Dharma talk, a little bit nervous. I'm like, well, samurai, when you're sitting there like facing their opponent, what are they doing? They're just calm in this moment. Like, where else are you going to be? Are you going to be running a million strategies, trying to like create a map of the world that you're going to run into, or do you really want to be in the world instead of this map that you've created? That all the not all the pain that we have, but a lot of the pain we have is when that map of the world that we think is real turns out not to be real, and then we get sad about it. It's like that's a wild way to live. I mean, it's how I live for, I think most of us do, but I always go back to myself in this, like, just to think, well, this should be this way, it should be this way, that shouldn't be that way. Well, it is that way. and you thinking that it's not going to be that way, it's not going to make a difference. Like you're saying with like the football player, he's like, well, he's supposed to throw the ball over there, but the ball's coming right at you. You gotta grab it, or like I was supposed to throw it to him. He's not there. Well, I'm just gonna throw it there anyway. It's a crazy way to live. But people live that way. I live that way sometimes too. Even like yesterday at work, someone ended up not checking what they were supposed to check at the shift time, and I ended up having to do twice as much work as I normally would in another area where I'm not very comfortable with. And for like a half an hour, I was just, ooh, man, I was just practice your breathing. You can't change the situation. This just is what it is. I know it's supposed to be different. Is it supposed to be different? In my mind, I had the map of, I know what's going to happen when the shift changes. Well, it didn't. And if I will go by the map that I had, nothing's going to get done properly. And then I'm just going to pass the nonsense on to the next guy. That's not living for all beings. That's living for me in this moment. That's not good.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone Zoom? Yeah, Max.
So first off, thank you for your talk. I'd like to ask a little bit, going back to your distinction between like the living in the moment that's still driven by our baser instincts, like with the dog, versus, this more vibrant sort of in the moment. I'm actually down with COVID now for the second time, and I have a lot of like brain fog going on right now. It's a sort of beginner's mind in that I can't really think of it. It's also definitely like sack of potatoes, can't really, do much besides being tied to those baser instincts. So like through this Q&A, you've been talking a lot about like getting swept up with these stories with the anger and bringing that energy down. But I was hoping you could speak a little bit more to bringing that energy up more, have sort of vibrancy when it feels like you can't.
It feels like so. Okay, try. Where can we channel this energy from, or? I think it really goes back to something that Shuji always says: you have to live for the benefit of all beings. It's not just me, it's not just you. I don't know your situation, but even we live in a society, as I say. We have to, even at the least, be an example for other people who are in the same situation that you're in. Now, if you have COVID, unfortunately, and you're feeling down, like what type of example would you be setting for even someone you don't even know on the street, where you're just trudging along, just, I feel terrible. Or if you walk by and you're just full of energy and they see this person walking by confidently with the zest in their step, and they're just, you're passing along something to everyone. But like where that comes from inside, for me, I know, like when I'm sick, I like to lie in bed and be miserable and not move. Or on a weekend, I like to lie in bed and be like, ugh, I worked so hard this week. But if I just sit up and look at the discomfort, look at the pain, and it's hard sometimes. It's, you know, so easy to get swept up and be like, oh, it's unfair. This shouldn't have happened. So it's those maps that we have again. This is what should have been. If you just look at the actual pain and you see how you're reacting to it, and you see the stories that you're telling yourself about it, this shouldn't have happened. Or like when I was at work, I'm going to get this guy back. He screwed me over. I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him sometime. So it's not necessarily the pain. The actual physical pain is it sucks too. But we're telling us those stories about justifying how we should be feeling bad right now. That's where you can make a difference. It doesn't even have to be, from the other perspective, it doesn't even have to be like, I should be feeling good now. That's another map you're throwing on it. Like, oh, I shouldn't be sick. I should be up. I should be energetic. Like, well, if you're not, you're not. Just look at what's happening, kind of feel what's happening. And usually when you get to that point, you're gonna feel better, even if you feel bad. That's how it's always worked for me.
Thank you.
Yes.
Anyone else? Very good. Okay, well, thank you, Brian. We can go ahead
Yes.
and close the Dharma talk.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The many beings are numberless, bowing to carry them across.
The many beings are numberless, bowing to carry them across.
Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, bowing to cut off the mind road.
Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, vowing to cut off the mind road.
Dharma gates are countless, bowing to wake to them all.
Dharma gates are countless, bowing to wake to them all.
Buddha's way is all embracing, bowing to follow through.
Buddha's way is all embracing, bowing to follow through.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Later.